Hello, Jeff Zwerink, and welcome again to Give and Take, the segment of our show where we explore important scientific ideas to help you be more confident in the truth of Christianity. Today, I'm joined by my friend and colleague, Ken Samples, and we're going to discuss the difference between science and scientism. Ken, it's good to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be with you, Jeff.
You know, I recall, and this is going to date me a little bit, but when I was younger, there would be these commercials come on where people would be talking and they talk about financial stuff. And one guy would go, well, my broker's E.F. Hutton, and E.F. Hutton says, and everybody would get quiet.
Yeah.
You know, E.F. Hutton talks, people listen.
Right.
You know, and I've noticed that science is a lot like that when science says something, people listen. So my question to you, is that a good thing or not?
Yeah, that's really a good question. I think that science does carry a unique authority. I've even said that, scientists are kind of the new priests. In the Middle Ages, when priests spoke, people kind of stopped and listened. I think today, scientists are in a very strong authoritative position. And I think that that is good, but it also needs to be checked and evaluated.
So let's explore what's good about that. Why is it that we ought to listen to what scientists have to say? What does science bring that we should listen to it?
Well, I think that science is one of the greatest achievements of human beings. I mean, the natural sciences. Why? Because it gives us genuine knowledge about the natural world. I mean, think about medicine and technology, lengthening lifespan. There are many benefits that have been derived by human beings from science, and therefore, I think it deserves a credible place of authority.
Well, it seems like my understanding of science and the way I've approached it is that science provides this tool to check our explanations against the real world, and so in that sense, it seems to be science has this power to tell us what's true. And if we're about listening to what's true, that would be a really good thing.
Yeah, and I think that science as a disciplined practice, I think when you engage in modeling, when you engage in predicting and testing, which is all that scientific discipline or practice, it's been shown to give us credible information. So science within its lane, within its limits, I'm all for it.
So science has this practice of putting forth explanations, putting forth models, making predictions, testing them, verifying, seeing what's going on in the real world. Yeah. That seems a very good thing. But there's this kind of term that sounds very similar called scientism, which I think you would argue is a bad thing. So what distinguishes science from scientism?
Well, science is, again, that practice. It's a method. And again, it does involve this modeling of the universe. And it involves making predictions, as you said, and ultimately testing, falsifying those. Science is a practice. Scientism is a philosophy. It reflects a worldview. Some of the ideas that it's connected to are that the material physical world is the only reality. And they would even say that scientific knowledge, that is knowledge derived from science, is either the only true knowledge or it's the best knowledge. Whereas science doesn't tell you that at all.
So if I think strongly or think highly about science, am I forced into some type of scientism? Because obviously science does have this capacity to bring us knowledge, help us understand what's true about the world. What do you do to respond to this claim that science is the only or the best way to find that knowledge?
Yeah, I think what's important here, Jeff, is certainly the practice of science is compatible with the Christian worldview. I think people in other worldviews could have a high regard for science because it gives us credible information. I think, however, when people move further down, they take science out of its lane and move it into philosophy. When they start saying, well, the only knowledge you really can have that's reliable is scientific knowledge, or when they tell you this physical world is all there is. I mean, there's no scientific experiment that can or will tell you this world is all there is. And in fact, the idea that knowledge is knowledge is only profitable if it comes through an experiment, that was never derived through an experiment. So these ideas of scientism, I think, exaggerate the role of science. And I think a Christian should always value and appreciate it, but we don't want to take it out of its lane. We don't want to make science and make it into scientism.
So, as a Christian, as we're engaging with people who might have scientism type views, how do we recognize that, and what are some suggestions you would give at how to counter that to maybe help the person see that they're conflating science with scientism?
Yeah, I think it's a good practice to simply say, look, Lawrence Krauss said that the only way you can have knowledge is through experiment. My question for Lawrence Krauss is, what experiment told you that? Or if some secular scientist like Stephen Hawking says, well, the universe is all there is. Well, what particular part of science told you that? I think that helps to show that those ideas are more of a philosophy of life. It's not strictly in accord with the scientific practice.
I think that's a good point. I think there are people who are definitely about advancing the agenda. It does seem to me that the more popular science, or as science is popular in the culture, and you have some of these more outspoken scientism promoters, it seems like there's just going to be people that we encounter as we're talking that kind of have this belief that, yeah, science is the best way, and if science really can't weigh in, we shouldn't believe it. What sorts of tools would you, or how as a Christian could I talk to those people to encourage them to see that there's more things to listen to? What other areas should we be listening to that we can encourage people to get a broader picture of what the truth is?
Well, there's a couple things that I think I would want to draw people's attention. Number one, science really can't tell you about the area of ethics and values. I mean, scientific study might help us develop an atomic weapon, but it's never going to tell us whether it's a good thing or a bad thing to use it. Moreover, it's not going to tell you whether the universe has an ultimate purpose. So science is an incredibly powerful tool, giving us knowledge about the natural world. But again, it has limits. When we move into ethics, we move into meaning. In fact, science itself can't tell you whether the laws of logic and mathematics is valid. You have to rely on those things in order to practice science. So I would want to conclude that we should value science, but keep it in its proper lane.
Very wise words, Ken. Thanks for joining the show today. When we look at the world, it's undeniable that science has been of great utility, has been a valuable tool for understanding how this world works, what's going on, how to develop technologies that aid humanity. No one really disputes the value of science. But Ken brings a very important point that there's a difference between saying science is a good way to learn about creation and science is the only or the best way. And that's where science gets into scientism. I would encourage you to go check out Ken's blog on this. Go to reasons.org and look for the article, How to Distinguish Between Science and Scientism. And you'll get a great picture of how to distinguish between the practice of science and the philosophy of scientism, but also just recognize how wonderfully science fits into a Christian worldview and how Christianity provides a great worldview, a way of looking at the world that helps us answer the deep questions, not just the scientific ones, but the ethical, philosophical, and theological ones as well.